Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's Travis here with JT Wealth, and I know I've been gone for a couple days, but I promise I have a really good reason, and we're going to talk about that today. Also, it helped me create the concept for today's video, which is the emergency fund and the importance of having an emergency fund to cover you or your family in the event of an unforeseen circumstance. So let's talk about just that today. Let's get into it. Alright, like I said, it's been a little while since I posted a video, 5, maybe 6 days, I'm not even 100% sure, but I promise I have a pretty good reason. And that reason is that last week on Wednesday, I found out that my grandfather in Florida had a stroke. So I had to kind of drop everything and go down to Florida, make sure he was okay, and help take care of the family, and just make sure that all of their needs were taken care of, because that was obviously a very stressful situation. Suffice it to say, my grandfather is an old breed Navy chief, and it's going to take a whole lot more than a stroke to take him down, so he's doing really well physically, and that is not the point of today's video, but I just wanted to let you guys know where I've been at in the last couple of days and why I haven't been posting. So I apologize for that, but I'm right back on schedule with today's video and the emergency fund, which came in super handy in order for me to be able to make that trip. So we're going to talk about that today. We talk about a lot of things here on the channel, all related to finance, and especially in the FIRE community with financial independence, retiring early, and creating our budgets and making sure that we're on schedule to set ourselves up for financial success. But one of those things that is often overlooked is the emergency fund. And understanding what an emergency fund is and why it's so important is absolutely pivotal to make sure that you don't have to mess with your investments or find yourself in a situation that you don't know how to deal with later on when they could arise. So let's first look at what is an emergency fund and why it matters. And I found a really good article that covers down on all of the things that we wanted to talk about today, and it came from NerdWallet, and it's literally just emergency fund. What is it and why it matters? The best kept secret in savings accounts, and an emergency fund being useful for unexpected expenses. So just so we're clear, when I talk about an emergency fund, I literally mean the amount of money in your savings account right now. That is the amount of money you have set aside in case of emergency. And there is varying degrees of personal expectations for emergency funds. A lot of people will say you need 3 months of all of your expenses to make sure that if you lost your job, you'll be okay. Some people go as far as to say you need a full year of expenses in your emergency fund just so that if anything happens, you and your family are okay. What you really need is just what you're comfortable with and making sure that you have yourself set up so that in the event of an unexpected emergency, you're okay. So what is an emergency fund? And an emergency fund is just a bank account with money set aside to pay for the large unexpected expenses such as unforeseen medical expenses, home appliance repair or replacement, major car fixes, or unemployment. And I'll gladly add my personal case to that list, which is that in the event your grandparents or your parents or a personal friend or family member gets sick and you need to get out there to visit them and make sure they're okay, or just worst case scenario, not have any regrets later on, that is a perfect example of a time where you would want to have the money available to make that flight or get that rental car, get the hotel, whatever it is you need to be able to do that without worrying about your expenses later. So why do I need an emergency fund? Well, emergency funds create a financial buffer that can keep you afloat in a time of need without having to rely on credit cards or high interest loans. And it can be especially important to have an emergency fund on hand if in debt, because it can help you avoid borrowing even more. Now, one of the first steps in climbing out of debt is to give yourself a way to not go further into debt. And I think that last part is so true. If you're already in a situation where you've got a lot of debt and you're working your way out, you're trying to find yourself to a point where you have absolutely no debt, which is everybody's goal who is in debt. I promise you, having been in a really, really rough situation, finding zero is super important, but having that emergency fund so that when the time occurs where you need to do something that is going to involve a fairly large expenditure, you have the money on hand. As far as credit cards go, I'll say this: depending on how you want to pay for your trip, for your travel, for your expenses, whether it's an appliance, a flight, or a car. If you do use the credit card, remember that you can then take the funds from your emergency fund and pay it off immediately. So you literally pay nothing in interest. Because as long as you pay off your credit card within the first 30 days or within the first statement period of that credit card, there won't be interest, okay? It has to roll to the next period, or usually 30 days after you spend it, in order for it to start accruing interest. And here's the question that I always hear, which is how much should I save for an emergency fund? And the short answer is, if you're starting small, try to set aside at least $500, but work your way up to half a year's worth of expenses. And like I said, that's where these numbers can vary so significantly. But if you look at the long answer, the right amount for you depends on your financial circumstances. And a good rule of thumb is to have enough to cover 3, like I mentioned earlier, up to 6 months worth of living expenses. You might need more if you're a freelance worker or work seasonally, but for the most part, 3 to 6 months will do. And if you lose your job, you could use the money to pay for necessities while you're finding a new job. Or the funds could just supplement your unemployment benefits. Either way, start small, but make sure you start. And since this is a finance channel and we do worry about investing and long-term investments, where do we put our emergency fund? Is this a fund that should be invested in the stock market? Is this an ETF or a mutual fund? Am I throwing all of my emergency fund at Tesla? No, let's look at where we put our emergency fund. So when it comes to your emergency fund, you want a savings account with a high interest rate and easy access. We use the term high interest rate here loosely, okay? We recognize that most savings accounts aren't gonna have a high interest rate. We just want you to get the highest one possible. So because an emergency can strike at any time, having quick access to your funds is crucial. So don't want anything that's gonna be tied up in long-term investment funds like an investment account, right? But the account should be separate from the bank account you use daily so that you're not tempted to dip into your reserves. Now you could look at a high yield savings account, which is a good place for your money, and it's FDIC insured up to $250,000, so it's safe and it continues to earn you interest. You can also access that cash quickly when needed, either through a withdrawal or transferring funds to your checking account. Okay, so now we understand the importance of an emergency fund, but how do we go about setting it up? What are the steps we need to take to make sure that we have an emergency fund on standby in the event we should ever need it? Well, the first step is to calculate the total amount you need in your savings account. So if you say have $2,000 a month worth of expenses and want to save 3 months worth of expenses for your emergency fund, obviously you need $6,000 in that emergency fund to feel comfortable. Then you'll want to set monthly savings goals to set yourself up for success. If you know you need $6,000 and can save $500 a month, that is a fantastic start in attaining that $6,000 goal. I would then consider having the money transferred from your checking to your savings account automatically every month. So it's a set it and forget it policy that allows you to save your money as fast as possible. Now don't forget that when you do reach your goal, you would want to go back and turn off that automatic transfer. Of course, there are many of other options for how you can save the money. Your tax return for one, side hustles for another, just saving change from everything you purchase, rolling it, taking it to the bank, and just any other windfalls you may see in the near term can always be put towards your emergency fund. Of course, don't forget, guys, that if you are paying down debt, it is super important to weigh the options here. Do you want to have the emergency fund or do you want to pay down debt? And I really do feel like this is an important key here. If you are trying to pay down debt and you're worried about putting money towards your emergency fund and not paying down the debt, here's something I'll give you as a kind of just food for thought. In the event your emergency comes up, what are you going to do? If there's no emergency fund, you're going to use your credit card again, right? Which is not helping you pay off your debt. So you need to focus on the emergency fund first and foremost, and then worry about the debt. Alright, so hopefully you guys understand why I was gone for a couple days. I promise this time I was not thinking about not returning to YouTube. It was nothing like that, nothing crazy. Just some personal issues that I had to take care of, some family stuff, right? So anyway, it helped me think that, hey, an emergency fund video would be a fantastic idea and something to bring to you guys that I haven't yet touched upon. So hopefully you found some value in today's video, and if you did, don't forget to give me a big thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel as well. Again, guys, thank you so much for checking out today's video, and I promise we'll have another one out for you tomorrow. Until next time, bottoms up.